You're staring at two listings right now. Both say perfect beginner cruiser. Both look clean in the photos. Both are priced to move. And one of them is going to quietly drain your savings for the next 5 years while the other carries you across an ocean. Here's what I found after putting 10 so-called beginner sailboats under the same cold light. Only 3 of them won't bankrupt you. Not because of the sticker price, because of what happens after the money leaves your hands. The cheapest boat to buy is almost never the cheapest boat to own, and the gap between those two numbers is where most first-time buyers lose $30, $40, even $50,000 they never planned to spend. I'll show you exactly which 3 survived, and I'll save the one that shocked me for the end because it comes down to a single detail on a 1978 hull that no broker will ever let you see with a shine on it. Whether this is your first cruising boat or you're trading up to your second, the same 3 findings decide whether you sail or whether you sink your retirement into fiberglass. Let me take you back to a boatyard in Rhode Island a few winters ago. I was crouched on the side deck of a 1978 Catalina 27, tapping the fiberglass around the starboard stanchions with a plastic mallet. The listing called her turnkey. The owner swore she was dry. But under my hand, the deck stopped ringing like a bell and started thudding like a wet cardboard box. That sound cost the seller $11,000 off his asking price. And it taught me the lesson this whole investigation is built on. The listing tells you what they want you to feel. The boat tells you the truth if you know where to press. So let me start with the trap that catches almost every new buyer, because it caught me too, years ago. The price trap. You open the listings and you sort by lowest price. That's the first mistake, and the whole used market is designed around it. Look at what shows up at the bottom of that list. A McGregor 26 for $9,000, a late model Hunter for $12,000, a tired Beneteau with a shine still on the gel coat for $14,000. Your eyes light up because you did the math in your head and you think you just found freedom for the price of a used pickup truck. I want you to slow down, because the purchase price of a cruising sailboat is the smallest check you will ever write for that boat. The McGregor 26 is the clearest example I found. Roger McGregor built more than 38,000 boats out of his California yard, and the water ballast versions from the 1990s are everywhere. Cheap and trailerable. On paper, it looks like the perfect starter. In the real world, it's a coastal day sailor wearing a cruiser's clothes. The water ballast that makes it light enough to tow also makes it tender and skittish once the wind pipes up past 20 knots, and the moment you try to load it with the ground tackle, water, fuel, and gear that real cruising demands, the boat sits down on her lines and the sailing goes to pieces. You didn't buy a cheap cruiser. You bought an expensive lesson about what cruiser actually means. The early production hunters from that same era tell a different version of the same story. They sailed fine off the lot, but a lot of them were built to hit a price point with deck hardware bedded fast on the assembly line and interior joinery that was never meant to be pulled apart and rebuilt. So when water finds its way in, and on a 40-year-old boat it always finds its way in, the repair fights you at every turn. I've watched buyers save $6,000 on the purchase and spend $22,000 over the next 3 seasons chasing leaks, soft decks, and a rig nobody wanted to touch. Here's the partial verdict on the price trap. The 3 boats that survived my investigation were never the cheapest to buy. 2 of them cost more up front than the boats I just described. But that higher purchase price was buying something you can't see in a photograph. It was buying a hull and a build that don't punish you every single season. And that raises the real question, the one that decides everything and that no listing will ever answer honestly. If the price tag lies, what's the one part of the boat that tells the truth about what it'll cost to own? Because I found it, and it's bolted to the bottom of the hull. The keel. Nobody wants to talk about the keel, because you can't photograph a problem there and make it look pretty, and because the fix is one of the most expensive things you can do to a small cruiser. But the way a builder attached the ballast to the hull, a decision made in the 1970s on a factory floor, is quietly setting your budget right now. Let me explain the split, because this is where the 10 contenders started separating hard. There are 2 ways to put weight in the bottom of a sailboat. You can bolt an external lead or iron keel onto the underside of the hull, or you can build a hollow cavity into the hull itself and pour the ballast inside, sealing it in fiberglass. That second method is called an encapsulated keel, and it changes your ownership math for decades. Take the Catalina line, the 27 and the 30. Frank Butler built more than 6,000 of the 27s between 1971 and 1991, and thousands more of the 30. Great for giving boats to learn on. Roomy, simple, parts everywhere. But most of them carry a bolted-on iron keel, and over 40 years the joint between that keel and the hull works, flexes, and weeps. Owners call the result the Catalina smile, a rusty crack that grins along the top of the keel. Dropping that keel, cleaning the mating surface, replacing the bolts, and rebedding the whole thing runs anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000 depending on what the yard finds when the keel comes off. It is not a deal breaker. Catalina still made my final list, but it's a cost you have to see coming, and the listing will have the boat sitting in the water precisely so you can't. Now put a Cape Dory 28 next to it. Carl Alberg designed her, and Cape Dory Yachts built her in Massachusetts from the mid-1970s into the late 1980s with lead ballast fully encapsulated inside a solid fiberglass hull. There are no keel bolts to weep, there's no joint to crack, there's no smile to grind out every few seasons. Alberg drew a full keel with the ballast sealed inside, and that single decision erases an entire category of expense from your ownership for as long as you own the boat. When surveyors talk about no keel bolts to fail, they're describing money that stays in your pocket year after year. This is the moment the investigation flipped for me. I went in assuming the cheap, popular, mass-produced boats would win on cost because parts are everywhere and everybody owns one. But when I lined up the 10-year ownership numbers instead of the purchase price, the heavier, older, better-built encapsulated keel boats started pulling ahead because they simply don't generate the repair bills the light production boats do. The Cape Dory 28, the Alberg 30 out of Whitby, the Bristol built in Rhode Island, all Carl Alberg or Alberg School full keel designs, all quietly cheaper to own than boats that cost half as much to buy. So the keel gave me a partial verdict. Encapsulated ballast beats bolted on iron over the long haul, and that one spec reshuffled my entire ranking. But a keel sits underwater where at least a surveyor can find it. The next problem hides in plain sight, above the waterline, in the one place every buyer walks across without ever suspecting it. And it's the single most expensive surprise in this entire investigation. The deck. Specifically, what's inside the deck. And I need the folks watching who already own a boat to hear this next part, because I know some of you have been thinking this whole video is only for the first-time buyer standing at the edge of the dock. It isn't. What I'm about to show you is something you can go check on the boat you already own this week, with no broker, no haul out, and no yard bill. So stay with me, because this next stretch is the one that can save a current owner the most money of anything I found. Here's what almost nobody explains before you buy. Most fiberglass sailboats from the 1970s and 80s don't have a solid deck. They have a sandwich. Two thin skins of fiberglass with a core in the middle, usually end-grain balsa wood, sometimes plywood, occasionally foam. That core makes the deck stiff and light without being heavy or expensive to build, and as long as it stays dry, it lasts forever. But every stanchion, every cleat, every winch, every handrail, every piece of hardware bolted to that deck is a hole drilled straight through the top skin and into the core. When the sealant under that fitting ages and cracks, and on a 40-year-old boat it has cracked, rainwater walks down the bolt threads and into the balsa. Wet balsa rots. Rotten core turns your stiff deck into a wet sponge, the skins delaminate, and the fix is to cut the deck open, dig out the ruined core by hand, dry the cavity, lay in new core, and glass it all back together. Let me give you the number that ends buying conversations. Recoring a deck on a small cruiser runs $15,000 to $25,000 if you pay a yard to do it, and on a lot of these boats that's more than the entire vessel is worth. This is the single finding that flipped more verdicts than anything else in my investigation. A $5,000 boat with a wet deck is not a $5,000 boat. It's a negative $15,000 boat wearing a cheerful listing photo. Now here's the part for the current owner and for the buyer too, because it costs you nothing. You do not need a haul out to find wet core. You need a plastic mallet or even the plastic handle of a screwdriver and a quiet morning. Walk the side decks and the cabin top and tap steadily, moving in a grid. Dry, healthy core rings back at you, sharp and high, like tapping a coffee mug. Wet, rotten core answers dull and flat, a dead thud, like knocking on a wet phone book. It's not subtle once you've heard both. Pay special attention around every stanchion base, around the chain plates, around the mast step, and around every deck fitting, because that's where the water gets in. That's exactly the sound that cost that Catalina seller $11,000 in the Rhode Island yard, and you can hear it yourself in 20 minutes. If you already own your boat, go do this before the season starts. A dull spot the size of a dinner plate that you catch this year is a weekend and a couple $100 in epoxy. That same spot ignored for 3 more years is a re-core and a 5-figure yard bill. This is the cheapest insurance in all of boat ownership, and I've watched too many owners find out the hard way because nobody ever told them to listen to their own deck. That tap test is one check out of maybe 40 I run before I let a boat get any of my attention, and I couldn't fit 40 into one video without losing you halfway through. So I wrote them down instead. 3 books that hold everything this video only had time to introduce. From the 20-minute dockside walkthrough, you can run yourself in front of the broker, to reading a hull number, to pricing a rig and a refit line by line before you sign, to the design ratios that tell you in 10 minutes off a spec sheet whether a boat is coastal or truly capable offshore. They're not a glossy catalog of best sailboats, they're confessions of expensive mistakes with the real numbers and the real yard bills attached, and every one of them is only useful before the check clears, because after that, the wet core and the tired rigging are legally yours. If you want that in your hands this week, scan the QR code right there on your screen or grab the books from the link in the description or the pinned comment. And with that mallet still in your hand, let's take these 10 boats down to the part of the boat nobody photographs. So how did the 10 contenders sort out on the deck? This is where being an Alberg School boat mattered again. Several of the Cape Dory and Bristol hulls were built with heavier solid glass in key areas or with cores kept away from the worst loaded fittings, which means fewer paths for water into the sandwich. The lighter production boats, built to a price with cored decks running right out to hardware bedded fast on an assembly line, are the ones I found soft most often. Not always. I've tapped bone-dry Catalinas and soaking wet Cape Dories. Age and neglect beat pedigree every time. But if I had to bet on a random 40-year-old boat's deck sight unseen, the build quality of the yard would move the odds, and it moved my ranking. That's the deck verdict. Solid or well-built cored decks stay in the running. Wet decks in the conversation no matter how pretty the topsides. But there's one more system on these boats that decides the winners, and it's the one buyers understand the least, because it sits down low where you never look until the day it strands you offshore. The rig and what drives the boat when the wind dies. Let me take the engine first, because it's the part that scares new buyers the most and the part the listings dress up the most carefully. A huge share of these 1970s and 80s American cruisers came with the Atomic 4, a little gasoline inboard that Universal built by the tens of thousands. And here's where I have to correct a myth the forums love to repeat in both directions. The Atomic 4 is not a death sentence, and it is not a treasure. It's a simple, gutless gasoline engine that will run more or less forever if it's been maintained, and that will terrify your insurance company because it's gasoline in a boat. The real cost question isn't whether the Atomic 4 runs today, it's what you'll do when it doesn't. Repowering a small cruiser with a new diesel is a $10,000 to $15,000 job by the time you buy the engine, adapt the mounts, redo the shaft and the exhaust, and pay the yard. So a boat listed as runs great, original Atomic 4 is a boat with a repower quietly waiting in its future, and you need to price that in the way the seller never will. A boat that's already been repowered with a modern diesel, a small Yanmar or a Universal diesel, and has the receipts to prove it, is worth thousands more than the identical hull with the old gas engine, even if both start on the first turn of the key at the dock. Now the rig, because this is the one that can actually hurt you. Standing rigging, the wire that holds the mast up, has a working life. Most insurers and surveyors want to see it replaced somewhere around every 10 to 15 years, and the fittings at the ends, especially where they swage onto the wire, fail from the inside where you can't see the crack forming. Re-rigging a small cruiser runs $3,000 to $6,000, and the chain plates, the metal straps that anchor the rigging to the hull, are the sleeper failure in this whole category. On a lot of these boats, the chain plates run down through the deck, right through that cord sandwich we just talked about, and they leak and they corrode where they pass through the deck, exactly where you can't inspect them without pulling them out. This is where the contenders separated one last time. Boats with external chain plates bolted to the outside of the hull, or with simple, accessible chain plate attachments, let you actually inspect and replace them without tearing the boat apart. Boats where the chain plates are buried in the interior joinery, glass behind a molded liner, fight you the whole way and turn a routine job into a $2,000 excavation. When I weighted the 10 boats on how honestly they let you see and service their own critical parts, the simpler, more accessible designs pulled ahead again, and it was the same names climbing to the top of the list. So now you can feel the ranking taking shape. The cheap production boats that win on purchase price keep losing on the keel joint, on the cord deck, on the buried chain plates, on the waiting repower. The heavier, older, better built, full keel boats keep winning on the parts you can't see, the parts that generate the real bills. But I promised you 3 survivors, and I promised you 1 finding that shocked me and that no comparison video will tell you. So let me bring it all home, because it comes down to a single archive number and a single hull, and it changed how I rank every boat I look at now. Here's the honest comparison that the whole used sailboat market is quietly built to keep you from running. Everybody sorts by price. Every listing photographs the shine, floats the boat so you can't see the keel, keeps the deck wet looking and pretty, and describes the tired old engine as a charming survivor. The comparison nobody runs for you is the 10-year cost of ownership, the total of the purchase, plus the keel, plus the deck, plus the rig, plus the engine, plus the 100 smaller bills, divided across the seasons you'll actually sail. And when you run that comparison honestly, the ranking turns almost completely upside down from the price list. When I did it, 3 boats survived. The Cape Dory 28, Carl Alberg's full keel design with the encapsulated lead ballast, and the honest, serviceable build out of Massachusetts. The Pearson 30, William Shaw's design, built in Rhode Island through the 1970s, a boat that gives you real cruising room and sails beautifully while keeping its systems simple enough to own without a yard on retainer. And yes, the Catalina 30, Frank Butler's boat, because for all the keel smile grumbling, the sheer number built means parts are everywhere and cheap, the systems are dead simple, and the ownership costs, while not the lowest, are utterly predictable. And predictable is what keeps you solvent. Predictable beats mysterious every single time you buy a boat. But here's the finding that genuinely surprised me, the one I want you to carry out of this video, because it decides between 2 boats that look identical in every listing. It isn't the model, it's the model year, and it's specifically about the deck. Across these production runs, the builders quietly changed their construction partway through. Cape Dory, like a lot of yards, evolved its layups and its deck detailing as the 1970s became the 1980s. Earlier hulls and later hulls of the very same model can differ in how the deck core was run, how the hardware was bedded, and how the chain plates passed through. 2 boats, same name, same length, same price, and one of them is carrying a $15,000 deck job in its future and the other one isn't. The reason you've never heard this is that it was buried in the details, the Owners Association records, the yard notes, the refit logs that dedicated owners kept and posted decade after decade in the forums, the places where somebody who loved a specific model documented exactly which years and which hull numbers had the trouble spots. That data was preserved by the owners themselves, the people with nothing to sell you, while every broker had every reason to keep the conversation on the shine and the sticker price. The honest comparison existed the whole time. It just lived in the hands of the people who weren't trying to sell you the boat. So here's what you do this week, and it costs you nothing. Before you fall for a listing, find the Owners Association or the long-running owner forum for that exact model. Read the refit threads. Find out which model years changed the deck, the keel, the rig, the engine, and match the boat in front of you to its real history. Then go stand on that boat with a plastic mallet and tap the deck yourself, the way I did in that Rhode Island yard, and let the boat tell you the truth the listing won't. The number that decides whether a boat bankrupts you was written down decades ago by someone who owned one and cared enough to record it. Now it's yours. Here's the emotional truth under all these numbers. The right boat doesn't just save you money. It gives you back the seasons you'd otherwise spend on your knees in a cold yard, chasing a repair you never saw coming, watching your savings and your dream leak out through a wet deck. You clicked on this because you refuse to be the buyer who finds out too late. That instinct is right. Trust it. You're the kind of buyer who wants the verdict, not the sales pitch. The one who'd rather hear which 3 boats survived and why than be flattered into the wrong hull by a glossy listing and a smiling broker. That's exactly who I make these for. So tell me, down in the comments, which 2 or 3 boats are on your short list right now and where you're watching from, because I read them and I'll tell you straight what I'd tap, check, and budget for on each one before you spend $1. Name your contenders. I want to see them. If you want the honest comparison run on every boat before you buy, and not the one the broker wants you to see, then come along, because you belong with the buyers who demand the real numbers. Next, I'm pulling apart the full keel cruisers everyone calls bulletproof for offshore. And I found one beloved blue water name from the 1980s that hides a chain plate problem serious enough to dismast you at exactly the wrong moment. You'll want to know if it's on your list before you wire the money. Before you go, let me tell you what's waiting inside the Cruising Compass. This video was just the overview. Members get the full survey walkthrough on all 3 winning hulls, and you can ask me your own question about a listing. A real person answers. Me. Not a machine. You'll belong right there alongside sailboat buyers like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime with 1 click. Now that you know which boats won't drain your savings, there's one choice that trips up nearly every first-time buyer. In the next video, I'll show you the honest truth about catamarans and monohulls. It's starting right here.